But next week, can everyone say next week? Next week, Andy Stanley is going to be starting a season. We know that you can reasons for the season, and we know life can be messy, right? We know that you can be messy, I can be messy, your neighbor can be messy, your friends can be messy. Anybody with me? Yeah. But the point of Christmas was that the point of Christmas and the reason that Christmas even exists is because people are messy. And so Jesus waded into the mess to provide us a solution and a way to figure out how do we wade through all the mess. So Andy's going to unpack that next week. So I want to encourage you to come as your messy self. Maybe invite a messy person you know. Don't say their name, but maybe invite them along to come sit with you next week. And Andy's going to be teaching that over the next coming weeks. And so it's going to be a fantastic series as we lead into Christmas. Anybody excited for Christmas? All right. That's good. I put up my Christmas lights yesterday, and you know when you expect to have like 40 strands, and then you pull them out and you have like 12, and you're every year there's just so much atrophy. Maybe if you know how to store them or fix them, come talk to me after service. But I didn't have many to hang yesterday. But we're concluding our series today called Being There, and the whole premise of this series is that God, like I already said, waded into the mess. And he sent his son Jesus into the world because we were messy. But one of the unique aspects of Christianity is that God sends his son Jesus into the world. And it's not a God who's distant, or it's not a God that is void of those messy situations. The unique part about the Christian faith is God wades right into it. Right into the mess. And the amazing part is that even in the struggles that we face, whether it's relational or whether it's something that we're finding at work or whether it's mental health or physical health, that Jesus can look at us because of the things that he has faced, and he can say, well, I've been there too. And so today we're going to be talking about a big topic. Today's a big one because I think we've all experienced this on some level, and maybe we don't know what to do with it. It can define us. It can take us off. It can take us off track. And this challenge that we're going to be talking about today, if we let it linger too long, it can actually derail us and stop us from accomplishing the things that God has purposed us to do, or even the dreams that we hope to have become a reality in our life. And a lot of it, and particularly in our younger childhood years, this becomes challenging. This difficulty is prevalent and in many people's lives, and is a challenge I think we all face, and it's the word rejection. Now, have you ever faced rejection before? Maybe you have, and who here wants to experience it again? Nobody puts their hand up. I was a young child. There was this kid beside me. His name was Ryan, beside our house. And Ryan and Darcy, they were the wild ones. Can I just take a minute to tie my shoelace? Because it's going to bother all of you, right? So, you know what happened? Hey, I noticed it. How many of you noticed it? How many of you are trying to help me, but I can't see you? Okay. So Ryan and Darcy live next door. And those hooligans, I tell you. And Ryan had a birthday party. He was the same age as me. And he invited the whole block, which is really exciting. When you hear the news as a kid that the whole block is going over to this kid's house, I mean, the adrenaline's pumping, you're excited, you're thinking about what kind of gift can I get, and you're thinking, oh, what's going to happen? And it was probably just in his backyard, but it seems like the best place to possibly be. And then I found out that not the whole block had been invited. There was a family that didn't get invited. And the last name was one that you all have a hard time pronouncing, which is Loeve, helping you out, which is my last name, and Josh didn't get invited to the party. Now, you all go, because you've all felt it. But to add salt, put salt in the wound a little bit, after the birthday party's done, he had a large set of stairs. It was wide, and all the kids are sitting on there, and they're all looking at this one gift. Now, I couldn't remember. I should have researched this, but I thought that Nerf came out around the age of 8 for me, Nerf guns, okay? So I'm pretty old, like dinosaurs were around when I was a kid. And so Nerf guns were the hot thing. And I remember he got the Nerf gun that I really wanted and I was going to get for him for his birthday. So he's sitting on the steps with this Nerf gun. He's telling everybody, this is the best present ever. And so I walk over. Because, I'd like to be included in the conversation, and I didn't go to the birthday, but we used to hang out all the time, so I just thought I'll come over. I'll walk up, and they're all looking at me, and you can tell, because we've all been in those moments, that you're not invited. And I'm like, nice Nerf gun. What are you doing here? He says back. I'm like, well, I'm coming to hang out. You're not welcome here. And so I went home, and I thought, Ryan, you suck. But we've all... And then Jesus changed my life, and so... And if we're human, we all feel that rejection, and we feel we want to respond to it. Now, you're thinking, I can't believe he said that. I would never think that. And you're just kidding yourself. Because for many of us, we experience rejection, but we don't know what to do with it. Now, today we're going to talk about, and we're going to look at Jesus' life as Jesus experiences rejection. And I think he offers us a better way forward. And in a world where we experience this often, whether it's on social media with getting FOMO when somebody went to a party and we weren't invited, or whether somebody was in a small group and we didn't quite get into it, or maybe somebody got an invitation to a New Year's Eve party that we didn't get an invitation to, we understand the feelings, right, of not being invited to the party. And so Jesus would look at us and he would say, I have been there too. So whether in your life, it's a job that you gave your best at and you got let go from, or maybe it didn't turn out the way that you had thought, or a relationship that dissolved after a decade, the rejection hurts. It can physically hurt. And Jesus would say in response, I've been there too, and I want to help you through this. Now, the story today we're going to look at is Jesus is at a party that he creates. Now, he creates it just because of who he is. It's at the very early stages of Jesus' ministry. He started at about 30 years old. We don't have much in the beginning years of his life. There's a few snippets in the Bible about his early years. But he starts at 30 years old, and it seems to he begins to teach and he begins to work with people. And as he does that, crowds just begin to grow. And they grow and they grow, and rooms are filled and houses are filled, and there's crazy things that are happening, and miracles are taking place, and people's lives are being transformed, and people are flocking to him. And so we're going to pick up on a story where this is happening to Jesus. But his family, somebody who's really close to him, who knows the details of his life, the needy, greedy. Nobody got the reference. I'll let you sit on that one. And then Jesus, it says, entered a house. And again, a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. I mean, there's so many people crowding into this space that they're supposed to be having a meal. They can't have a meal. But look what happens is Jesus, again, people are flocking towards him. Look what happens with his family. And when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him. I find this fascinating. It's like, whoa, we don't want him to get too big for his boots. Oh, we maybe have to bring him down a little bit. I mean, he's embarrassing us. He's teaching these new ways, and he's going against this religious system, and he's stepping out and doing something that makes us feel uncomfortable. It doesn't tell us why they wanted to take charge of him, but to me it's clear that Jesus is doing something that they don't agree with. And maybe for some of you, the reason you haven't leaned into your faith more is because of external pressures. Maybe it's from your family. Or maybe it's because somebody told you would never be able to go to a church, or you would never be able to follow. I mean, think about the things that you've done. I mean, there's many reasons that we don't lean in, but these are sometimes the reasons that we don't lean into our faith, is that we have external criticism, or there's people that have told us that we're too far gone, or we tell ourselves this, or there's external pressures when it comes to fulfilling that dream or fulfilling the purpose or call in your life. Particularly when I stepped into ministry 20 years ago, there was a lot of people in my world that said, you can't make money in ministry. And I told them, I don't think that's why you do it. But rejection comes at us. And rejection comes from Jesus at his own family. And look what they say. He is out of his mind. I mean, I don't know the words that have been spoken in your life, but these are the type of statements that can easily run laps in our head. And it's fascinating to me that some people have left our lives or are no longer a part of our everyday, and yet they occupy real estate in our heads. And this is true. I think you've all experienced this, is that there's people, they may have walked out of your life, but they are running laps in your mind. And if we're not careful, when it comes to things like rejection, the words of others can become stronger than the voice of our friends or those who care about us. The lies that come out of maybe people, or maybe even we have spiritual forces that are against us, sow lies into our minds that rob us of even what God believes us to be. And if we're not careful, people can run laps in our minds. And Jesus was rejected by his family, religious leaders, his hometown, his disciples. There's even examples of Jesus trying to go into his village to heal people, and he couldn't heal people because they refused to believe in who he was. And the truth is that when it comes to following Jesus, he sets an example for us. And it's easy to look at this story and say, oh, that's because Jesus' family didn't like what he does. But Jesus outlines for those that choose to follow him. And maybe you're on the fence, or maybe you haven't taken that decision yet. But if you have chosen to follow Jesus, one of the things that he tells us is that rejection will be part of the story. And what keeps us into the belief zone rather than the following zone, what makes us not want to lean in with actionables around our faith at times, is because we know that there may be a cost on the other side. And we say this often around here. Andy's going to be teaching next week, and this is one of the phrases that Andy uses quite often, that following Jesus is different than believing in Jesus, because believing in Jesus doesn't cost you anything. But following Jesus will cost you something. When you begin to say, yeah, I believe in Jesus, people go, okay, well, they start looking at your life, integrity, character, faith. Often when I'm flying or I'm out and people ask me, what do you do for work? I'm always hesitant to say what I do. Not because I'm embarrassed. Okay, I'm not embarrassed to be a pastor. But I am a conversation killer, okay? But people often go like this. They go, oh, I'm sorry, particularly when they use like colorful language. They'll say like, oh, I'm so sorry for using that language. And often I feel inclined to be like, well, don't worry about it. And I'll be like, just hold on, just take a deep breath, you know. But the truth is that there's a cost of following Jesus, and there's an expectation too. But part of that is when we choose to step out, not everyone is going to understand the decisions that you make or the things that God leads you into. Particularly if you don't come from a faith background, it can be particularly challenging, or from a faith family. Or if you come to faith later on in life, it can be a challenge, and you can feel rejected by those around you when you're choosing to take a step towards him. And if you are with him, there is a price. And there is a price for following. But how do we then respond to persecution or rejection? How do we respond to the people that aren't necessarily aligned? Or how do we respond or not respond to rejection? Well, Jesus wouldn't respond these two ways, and then we're going to talk about how we respond. First of all, is this: Jesus did not retreat when he experienced rejection. When we feel rejection, we often want to isolate. We want to get alone by ourselves because we feel like, well, I just don't want people to hurt us. And so we remove ourselves and we say, you know what, I'm going to create a little bit of space or a little bit of distance. And Jesus would not retreat, and he did not retreat when he experienced rejection. The second thing is that Jesus didn't do is this: Jesus did not retaliate when he experienced rejection. He didn't get on social media and fire off those comments. He didn't unfollow everyone hoping that they would notice. Jesus didn't retaliate with his words. He didn't push away. Instead, we're going to see Jesus' response is something different than I think we would expect. Let's look back into the story. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." And what Jesus is about to say next seems harsh. It really is. This is what he says next. "Who are my mothers and my brother?" he asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him. And he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and my sister and my mother." And Jesus responds to rejection with an invitation. He rolls out an invitation. And where you could look and say, it kind of seems like they're trying to make him a doormat, Jesus rolls out the welcome mat. He looks and he sees people around him, and he invites them to be part of his family. A family not full of judgment, a family not full of critique, a family predicated on an idea that Jesus is full of grace, that all people, regardless of what they've done, are accepted, and truth, that he can help you know who you are and to live in the truth that he has outlined for you to live. And Jesus invites rather than retaliates or isolates. Jesus experienced rejection, but he turned around and he offers an invitation. John, the gospel writer John, actually writes it like this: "He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right," I love this, "to become" what? Children of God. That where maybe we feel rejected from our own families, that Jesus welcomes us into a new one. Where we feel like there's no place where we belong, that Jesus says there is a place for you at the table. Where you might feel like you're not enough, or you feel like there's been enough adversity against you that you're wondering, can you be loved? Is there a place for you? Jesus would say, if you believe in me, there is always a place for you. There is an empty seat that God uses as an open invitation to you to say, come and sit with me and be a part of the family. And even when we feel like a doormat at times, Jesus extends the invitation, the welcome mat, to be a part of what he is back. And so Jesus doesn't retaliate. Jesus responds with love. And Jesus didn't retreat. He refuses to give up. And he fights. We talked about that last week until the end, that we might have a place, that when all else fails in our life, we can go and his grace and his mercy are there. What comes after Jesus' rejection? What happens after this moment? And his mothers and his brothers are like, stop teaching. Jesus is like, I'm going to fulfill the thing that God has called me to do. And he continues to walk in that way. He teaches about the kingdom of God. He continues to do miracles. He heals. He feeds the hungry. He raises the dead. He keeps his feet moving in the direction that God has called him to go. And Jesus did not allow his rejection to turn into his resignation. Rather, rejection can be the direction for where God wants you to work. Let me explain that. There are parts of my life, and maybe parts of your life or your story, where you have felt something deeply. It actually might be the reason that you came back to church, is you were looking for something more, and you found it. Maybe it was the fact that you didn't believe you deserved a second chance and you found it. Or maybe you didn't know where to begin in your faith journey, but you believed that there was a God out there, so you took a step of faith and you came out. But it was because somebody told you that there's not a God, but there was something in you that just didn't sit right. And so you tried to lean into the story. And so now you're passionate, right? You might be passionate about other people discovering that because there was something that awoke in you. In the places where we've been rejected, the reason I love our kids' environments, the reason I'm so thankful for Mary and every single kid's volunteer down that hallway is because they create a space where kids are known and they're loved and they have leaders that invest and pour into them because there is a world that tells us of who we are supposed to be and sets these boundaries around us and at times even rejects us when we make mistakes. But what I love about our kids' environments, even last week I heard stories of kids running to their classrooms, a place where they're celebrated and they're loved. Because we know that we'll all face rejection, but I'm so thankful that our kids here at Centerpoint Church will experience the things that Jesus offers all of us, which is grace and truth and love. The hard part about rejection is we want to live in it. But what Jesus does is he invites us in, and typically in those spaces where we have felt that, we have an opportunity to be an answer for somebody else in that same space. Why am I passionate about our church? Because I still remember a Sunday morning experience when I grew up. And maybe you had a tough church experience. I'm not going to get after the church. We've all had weird church experiences because church can be weird, right? Like, right? Is anybody else like, because we have messy people. I remember the first day I stood out to ever play music. I played bass this morning, but the first day I ever played music in church. I had an acoustic guitar. I was so proud of it. It was a Seagull guitar that was probably out of tune and whatever else. But I stood up, and I was about 14 years old at the time. And I played my heart out. And I thought I did pretty good. I remember walking down the stairs, and somebody turned to me and they said, "Thanks for playing this morning. It sounded good, but your glasses were dirty." And it struck at the heart of something. And for many years, I didn't go back to church. Or many years, I lived a duplicit life because I didn't believe that the church could receive me for who I was. So if you ever wonder why I'm passionate about doing church for everybody, it's because I was that somebody. And we want to create a space here. We know that life is messy. But we want to create a space where everybody can come because Jesus invites us all to come to the table, regardless of our mess. He's experienced rejection. He said, I've been there, but my invitation to you is not to isolate, is not to back off, is not to retaliate, but it's to lean in. And it's to create a space where others might find what you found. And so we're passionate here at Centerpoint Church about creating a space for everybody. Because Jesus didn't retaliate, he didn't tap out, he leaned in. And he gives us all an invitation to do the same for those around us. I'm going to invite the band to come up, and we're going to sing a song this morning called Firm Foundation. God calls us to be a part of his family and to connect together, but also that he calls us to have a foundation further on something greater than our own. Now, we're going to have difficulties in our life. Over the last 4 weeks, we've talked about a bunch of them. We've talked about the fact that things can get darker. We've talked about today things like rejection. But the way that we get through these situations in our life, the way that we get through the ups and downs, is we need a foundation greater than ourselves. So after Jesus, even in this story today where he's rejected, he goes to the cross, he dies, and he rises again so that we might have life. Oh, the 2 weeks in a row. We might have life. That's not your fault, man. It was me. But that we might have life and we might have it more abundantly. But he invites us in. That in the places where we feel like we want to isolate or we feel like we've let somebody down or we're told that we're not enough, that he's like, I invite you to come to the table. I am enough. I invite you to come to the table. It's by my grace. And you receive it when you believe in me. And so today, at the end of this series, I want to right now invite you to stand to your feet, and I'm going to pray. If you can stand to your feet, that would be great. And we're going to sing the song, Firm Foundation. That we're going to look to our Heavenly Father. And maybe today you have felt, whether it's rejection or you have going through a challenging and difficult situation, that today I want to invite you to respond. I want to invite you into the invitation that Jesus gives to us to put our faith in something bigger than ourselves, to lean into the grace and the truth that he offers us, to say there is a different way. And I don't know what your situation looks like. Good news is God does, but the invitation extends to you to not stay where you're at, but lean into him. He invites you to put your faith on something bigger than yourself. So I'm going to pray today. And if you're carrying something heavy, I want to encourage you to sing and to bring it before Jesus and say, here it is. So let's pray together. God, I pray this morning that we would receive your invitation, that we would receive your invitation to the table to be known by you and loved by you. God, I ask that today, that where we might feel rejected or we might feel like we're not enough, that you would come against those lies and you would remind us of who you are. That God, you are good and you are faithful. And that God, you don't reject us, but you say because of your son, Jesus, we are accepted. And so today, God, we ask that we would remember that you would help us to lean into that. And God, help us to have the faith to believe that God, you will provide a way, that you accept us, God, just as we are because of what Jesus has done. So God, we thank you. We put our faith and our trust in you, and we sing right now, God, that you are our foundation, the one we can put our life on. So let's sing.